Hello and welcome to Movie Marathon Mood. It's the show where we watch a bunch of movies and then we talk about them. It's as simple as that. On this episode, we begin our look into the Star Wars movie franchise with episodes 1 and 2. We're watching in story order, so that begins with The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. It's all right here on Movie Marathon Mood. Stick around.
You refer to the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the Force. You believe it's this boy?
He can see things before they happen.
He can help you.
The Force is unusually strong with him.
He was meant to help you.
Anakin! Tell him to take off!
Hi, I'm Jesse Ghostrap, joined by my pal Drew Cordell. Drew, my friend, how are you, sir?
Doing well, Jesse, and may the Force be with you, my friend.
May the 4th be with you, sir.
Ha-ha!
Haha. It is that time, the season for Star Wars celebrations. We've already been in Star Wars territory over on TV Binge Drinking, who watched the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian there.
Mm-hmm.
Only fitting that we finally start diving into the movie series as well. And basically, we've already talked about our Star Wars origin stories, so there's no need to go all through that sort of thing again. But it is worth, at least before we dive specifically into the movies of this episode, The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, to talk about the order that we're watching them in, because the order of these things is always up for debate for so many.
Yeah.
I had a friend that when Disney Plus first started, he had never watched a Star Wars movie. And he was asking me what order to watch them in. And I said, for a newbie, watch them in the order they were released. I think that's, without fail, the order that they should be watched in. For new people.
Right.
But I've lived with these movies my entire life. The ones that I could have lived with my entire life, obviously.
Right.
But I've seen them approximately 1 billion times each. And knowing them backwards and forwards, I personally like watching them in story order. So that's the order that we're going to be watching them through. And the more that we have, the Star Wars stories and so forth being added into the mix, I kind of like when you're watching them going back and forth in different eras of Star Wars too.
Right.
That kind of adds a interesting back and forth flavor to it, I think. So this episode will be all in one era, but I think there's some interesting double features afoot in our watching.
Yeah, including the next episode will be the next 2 episodes.
Right.
So it'll be fun to see how those kind of stack up against each other, and especially Rogue One, since it is essentially built to bleed right into New Hope. It'll be fun to watch it back to back with A New Hope. So we'll see how that pans out. And I've actually done that before, or at least watched. I don't think I watched all of A New Hope, but I think I watched the beginning of it, like right after I watched Rogue One when it first came out on Blu-ray, and it was fun. I'll definitely be intrigued to watch it in full in one sitting, both of them back to back. That'll be a blast. And then kind of seeing Solo after Revenge of the Sith, how the galaxy has changed after the Empire, has taken full control in a little more lax story that's not fully driven by the main Skywalker saga. Uh, so it'll be fun to watch these all in that order.
And just in general, the flow of the story and moving through different time frames. There's a lot to say about watching it that way as well. But again, if you're a newbie, watch them in the order they were released. I don't think it's. I mean, it would be interesting to see what people think of it watching it for the first time in story order. Like as an experiment, I think it'd be interesting. Like, who is the Phantom Menace?
Right.
If you've never seen another Star Wars and have managed to avoid any knowledge of other parts of the saga, what would you or would you not pick out from this? I mean, I get the impression that the Phantom Menace is designed to be watched with that knowledge in advance.
Right.
You already know where it's going. You've seen the movies. I guess that could be an interesting question for like George Lucas. What was your full intent here in terms of do you actually want people to start with episode 1 as an introduction? Because I feel like it works better as a prequel.
Yeah.
And not as its own introduction. And I think that's in 100% the intent. Like you think about the promotional poster that I most remember from this with young Anakin standing in front of a shadow of Vader.
Right.
Well, we don't exactly see Darth Vader in this movie, so I think you're expected to know Darth Vader is a thing.
Right.
And connected to this little boy. But it's still, I think, fun to watch it in story order and to see that change and develop. All that being said, when it comes to the Phantom Menace, like I was 15 years old when it came out. And I think that's quite a ripe age to be excited about a new Star Wars movie. Not that I'm not today, because I still do get excited about Star Wars. But 15 is a very special kind of time, and I grew up with the original trilogy, and I don't remember watching them for the first time. But The Phantom Menace is the first Star Wars movie that I remember watching for the first time.
Right.
Because the original trilogy is like baked into my DNA. And then The Phantom Menace, I remember sitting in the theater opening weekend and all the, Fox fanfare, Lucasfilm logo a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And my legs started physically shaking. I've never before or since had a physiological response that strong. But it was just like realizing in that moment, like I was already excited, but the realization that after this familiar opening, I'm about to see brand new Star Wars.
Right.
A brand new story. And I know because I live in a world that for a lot of people, saying, "Oh, I was excited before the Phantom Menace actually started," is preface to, and then I saw the movie. Disappointment. For so many people, that's the Phantom Menace story. But I don't think that's the narrative that we're going to be speaking on
No.
in this episode. It is not as good as the original trilogy. I think that's a fair sentiment. The original trilogy are 3 amazing movies. We'll talk about them soon enough. But I really love The Phantom Menace. No irony.
Right.
I genuinely enjoy the movie, and it hasn't changed with time. Even as I've grown older, I appreciate so many things about it. I remember when it got released in 3D, and I got to go see it again. I believe that was in 2012,
Yeah,
but but
that sounds right.
13 years after its initial release, when it's had plenty of time to like sit there in the pop culture landscape as this pinata, this punching bag of a movie. Uh, it- for, and then when I saw it in the theater again, and there's little kids there and stuff in a theater, and everybody's just getting all excited
Yeah.
at all the right places, and you feel that energy all over again. I'm like, there it is. You know, this is a good movie. It still is, and it can still be exciting and fun to watch, engaging even young new minds to it. It still works. It's a fun ride. Uh, and I say that there's plenty to break down about it and things to criticize about it too. And I think it's worth reading the opening crawl for the movie, which I'll just dive into now. Turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic, which already, like, the Galactic Republic, I mean, okay, it could be some more to it, but it sounds like, why are we concerned about the Republic? This could be kind of boring. And then Lucas gives us the taxation of trade routes to outlying star systems is in dispute. And now I know it sounds boring. Taxation of trade routes.
Right.
What? Hoping to resolve the matter with the blockade of deadly battleships. That sounds exciting. Deadly battleships. The greedy Trade Federation has stopped all shipping to the small planet of Naboo. So we're worried about the greed of a trade federation and whether they're shipping or not to a planet.
Right.
Okay. While the Congress of the Republic endlessly debates this alarming chain of events, the Supreme Chancellor has secretly dispatched 2 Jedi Knights, the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy, to settle the conflict. What I think is interesting about the opening crawl is, like, it sounds boring, and I guess it's Lucas really wanting to start in a beginning point where there isn't yet conflict. Like, there's the background of conflict about to start, but we're essentially in a boring world. Not inherently boring, but boring like we have been in a state of peace, and the world's been okay, and the conflict's about to start. And he's so much at a time. Lucas' story won't even just begin in the middle of the action; it'll begin at the end of some other story.
Right.
and then you'll dive into the main narrative. He has so many stories that'll just jump you right into the action. And here, for the first time, he's giving you a beginning and setting up a new world. Like, sure, we've seen a Star Wars world before, but we haven't seen it not in scraps.
Right.
And I honestly, like, switching over to just a little bit of praise. One of my favorite things about the prequels and Phantom Menace in particular is it sets up a really interesting world that have components you've never seen before. First of all, just like Naboo and underwater city, and you get to see Coruscant and all these different parts that you haven't seen so fully and in a lush kind of way. The battle droids are fun. You get these unique little touches that I think are really dynamic and really fascinating to watch. And it's something that Lucas always did with each of his movies, was push the technology, want to show you new sights and sounds. You get something unique every time
Right.
you come to a Lucas Star Wars movie. He's always pushing, seeing new sights and sounds, new technology.
Yeah.
And this movie does an awful lot. You know, it does so much. It's new. It doesn't get enough credit for its use of motion capture and having Jar Jar as a character, mostly because
Right.
people trash Jar Jar.
Yeah.
I don't hate Jar Jar. I have more problems with young Anakin.
Right.
I have more problems with Jake Lloyd and young Anakin than I do with Jar Jar Binks. But I appreciate and a lot of the technology and the CGI that gets trashed a lot. All these movies use too much CGI. I don't really. I mean, I understand parts of that, but I don't really think that's I think the CGI in this movie is actually incredible. And I'll go a step further that I know some people will 100% disagree with, but I've stood by this since the movie came out. I think it should have won Best Visual Effects at the Oscars over The Matrix.
Right.
Um, and I'm ultimately not upset that The Matrix won, but I think The Matrix won because of bullet time and not because of the minutia of its effects.
Right.
And I think the effects throughout Phantom Menace are incredible. Like I said, the underwater cities part of that, but also like the final battle when you're on Naboo with the Gungans and
Yeah.
the droids, and it matches. Like, you never forget you're watching a live action movie, but you're watching something that's fully CG when you're watching the droids and the Gungans, and that's really crazy. It's still crazy to me. How good that looks in comparison with everything else. Like, it all just works so fluidly. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that sort of stuff, Drew.
Well, to go back to kind of the hype and everything of leading up to it, I was 12 when Phantom Menace came out, and of course, I was in the same boat in terms of, like, I really don't remember the first time I saw the original trilogy, but I do know that I watched them over and over and over again in my childhood,
Yes.
and I was a huge fan of Star Wars and had really had experienced kind of a validation because I had been a fan like my whole childhood and had not been bullied. I'm not going to say I was bullied, but um, other kids that didn't grow up with Star Wars, like, uh, kind of looked down on me liking Star Wars for whatever reason. And then a couple of years before Phantom Menace, of course, in '97, the special editions came out, and all of a sudden, Star Wars was everywhere again. Um, and now all these other kids that had not grown up with Star Wars were experiencing a new way to see it, a new VHS release at the time. After they were in theaters, it was great for me just being able to see the movies in theaters. Um, but all that aside, like, the idea of the prequels had been around. Lucas had talked about them for a long time, and then the fact that they finally announced them and finally had a release date, all these things had me very excited. And I actually won tickets to a midnight show through some kind of trivia from a local internet provider, going back to the days of dial up. But my dad told me to fill out the trivia, and I'll never forget the questions because one of them was what detention block is Leia in the Death Star, and it was AA-23. And then the other one was a much easier question. Um, uh, and there was what's the pit that Luke and Han were sentenced to die in Return of the Jedi, and of course it's Sarlacc pit. So won that trivia pretty easily, and got to go see it at midnight. And the crowd. This is where I kind of differ with the narrative that a lot of people have about this movie, that like they went and they were immediately disappointed, and that everyone felt that way. I saw it with a big crowd that first night. It was packed, and there were cheers, and there were huge audience reactions beginning to end. And it wasn't just that time either. I saw the Phantom Menace to this day remains the movie I've seen the most in theaters. Uh, Hilariously tied with J.J. Abrams' Star Trek because I ended up seeing it 5 times. But I've seen it. I saw it 5 times in theaters that summer, and every time I saw it, it had a great response from the audience. And I think that people just cherry picked certain things they didn't like about it. And was it as good as the originals? No. I think that's a consensus. Um, but I think a lot of people expected one thing and got something else, and kind of held on to that. And then it's easier to pick something apart later. Um, and so, these feelings may have developed as time went on, for sure. But I think initial uh, reactions were a little more, mixed than just overwhelmingly negative.
Well, I'll point out that the cinema score,
Yeah,
when Phantom Menace has an A- cinema score,
right.
so that means right after the movie, early screenings, initial screenings, and they just tested the audience when they came out. How was it? And they gave Phantom Menace an A-. That was the immediate impression before they could get spoiled by other criticism, or hear an idea like Jar Jar sucks. You're right, he does suck, and you
Right.
just kind of run with it in your head without any regard for the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think honestly, that's kind of what has befallen, mainly, definitely the prequels, and to a degree, it's happened to the sequel trilogy as well, in terms of like the general feedback. But for sure, the initial response, and especially mine, um, it was pretty positive. And especially that first time, you like you said, you put that beautifully. Like that, this is the first time that you remember the first time you saw a Star Wars movie. This Star Wars movie, um, and the anticipation for that Fox fanfare and everything after was just I've honestly, I don't think I've experienced anything quite like it since. I had, I had school the next morning because I wasn't out of school yet. I think it was like my last week of sixth grade. So I went into school, and of course, all my friends were trying to get me to give them all the details and tell them every little part and this and that, and I didn't. But it was just a fun time.
Could have just told them to read the back of the soundtrack with Qui-Gon's funeral.
Right, yeah. And thankfully, somebody had burned a copy of that soundtrack for me, and not I did not see the back of it because otherwise I would have saw Qui-Gon's noble end on the back, along with the names, a couple of other tracks, the funeral, something else that would have given away certain plot details. But I also, like, before I get into the movie itself, the poster that you were talking about, I had that poster in my room.
Me too.
Uh, on the back of my door for a long time. I actually had the special edition New Hope poster on one side of the door, and then the Phantom Menace teaser poster. And another thing I want to touch on too, two things I guess, but like one, the trailers for this was like the first time I remember there being like absolute buzz and anticipation for trailers. And now, that's a common thing. That's like there's a new trailer that comes out every day, and for a movie, people like tweet about it and this and that. But like back then, before YouTube, before um, the way things are now, the only way you could really see the trailer besides seeing it in the movie that it was shown in front of, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was the Rugrats movie. I think one of the trailers was shown in front of the Rugrats movie. And I did go see the Rugrats movie just to see the Phantom Menace trailer.
Meet Joe Black was at least one that is initially getting the trailer too. So a lot of
Okay,
people snuck into Meet Joe Black
gotcha.
just to watch the trailer.
Right. And I think both of those came out around the same
Right.
time. So, yeah, it's really it was really interesting to think what was coming out at that time. But I remember I downloaded it on my dad's computer on QuickTime.
Yeah.
And just it took forever to download on dial-up internet. So that in itself was like a wave of anticipation. But especially that first teaser trailer, it's still. I mean, I remember it pretty well. It had a huge impact, and of course, had everyone so excited. And the other thing is just this had one of the largest marketing campaigns I think I've ever seen, because I don't think anyone's really ever been able to even come close
No.
to to matching it. Because well, you had the fast food chains, you had Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and
KFC.
KFC
Yeah.
all lined up, and you had all the toys, and you had cups and all the different things. And of course, I had a bunch of that, and then the Pepsi and Mountain Dew and Pepsi One cans that had the characters on them. Uh, Kenner had a Phantom Menace line of action figures, and every time that for like a solid month or two leading up to the movie, because that's they had a few of the figures out before then. I was saving up my allowance and going, having my parents take me to Walmart, and I would buy like one or two of the new Phantom Menace figures, and ended up having quite a few of them, and had a blast with that. I had Qui-Gon Jinn's lightsaber, uh, and Obi-Wan's. Uh, so much stuff. There was just so much merchandise for Phantom Menace. There were video games that came out. Yeah, some of them came out like right around the release, and some later. The one I really liked the most was probably Episode 1 Racer, which is built around the pod
Yes.
racer, and it was just recently released on a PS4 or PlayStation Store and Nintendo on the Switch, and I bought it on the Switch for like $15. I've played it quite a bit, and it's a lot of fun. Kind of fun trip down memory lane, but yeah. So it had like this huge push, and so the anticipation was definitely there. When I saw it, I was absolutely floored. I enjoyed it. And like you said, like you were 15, I was 12. I think like in those early to mid teen years, like it really was like the perfect time to see that movie. And um it I loved it. I was absolutely enthralled by it. I enjoyed it. Not to say that I wasn't aware of some things that weren't the best, but I think like the overall experience, I just absolutely had a blast. And I think that that's one of the things that this movie offers, that if you're not willing to accept it, then you're probably not going to like it. And it's kind of a unique way to start the trilogy too, because especially when you think about where the prequels go and what happens and the tones of the different episodes. This, when you compare it to the original trilogy, this is like starting a trilogy with Return of the Jedi in terms of like the tone and like action and everything else that's in there, that's crammed in there. It really is like on a similar plane of thinking as Return of the Jedi, and in terms of like scope and in terms of color and all these other things. Like that's and at the time, and as we'll discuss as we talk about these movies, at the time, Return of the Jedi was my favorite Star Wars movie, because I've gone through periods of time where one of the original trilogy is my favorite, and it has changed. It's changed three times, so or changed twice, I guess. Because but when I was younger, Return of the Jedi was my absolute favorite, and So for Phantom Menace to be very similar to that in that way, it absolutely hit me right in the heart in terms of how that goes. But I think I have to agree with you on the world building aspect, because I was actually going to make the point, um, and actually say something a little more controversial, that I think this might have the best world building of the whole saga, because just in this movie, the amount of things that were added and things that are still very core to Star Wars and what people think about are still very present, and they stem from the Phantom Menace. I mean, you're talking the Jedi, the way the Jedi Council worked, and the ideas of the Jedi Council and Qui Gon's um disapproval of their methods, and the good and the bad of where the Jedi are coming from are still very central to Star Wars and subsequent movies and series and pretty much everything else. Uh, for better or worse, midi-chlorians come from this. Um, and I know a lot of people groan at that because it basically brings science to something that's mystical, and I get that, but I do think that it was an interesting development and an interesting change. It wasn't even a change; it was just something we didn't know, and I don't think it's nearly as grown worthy as people make it out to be. I think that in a way, it makes sense that you would have these cells in you that react to the force, that give you a connection to it, or make you more likely to have a strong connection to it. That makes sense. Um, so I've never really hated mini chlorians that much. But it's been we made reference to it when we were reviewing Mandalorian, that Disney has acknowledged how much the fans hate it by basically making it a euphemism and calling it an M count instead of saying midi chlorian. So there's that aspect. There's just the seeing the Jedi, as Lucas loved to say in the documentaries for these movies, which were all great, by the way. Like, these special features on the DVDs of these were incredible. Some of the best, especially Phantom Menace, like some of the best making of documentaries I've ever seen, and still worth checking out, by the way. Lucas always said he was excited for people to see the Jedi at the prime of the Jedi, because in the original trilogy, Obi-Wan is old, Vader is a cyborg, and he's old too. Luke's young and has been trained by old people, so the action was definitely in that. And I like the lightsaber fights in the original trilogy. They have their own style. They're different from what you see here, which is what people are used to now, the prequels. But at the time, it was so different from what we had seen in the original trilogy, and that we got to see that in what my opinion is still the best lightsaber fight in the whole saga. I know people kind of have their own opinions about it, and I don't remember where yours falls. But to me, it just in terms of like the choreography, and even in what happens, like in the emotional, and it does like as it's pointed out that this is a significant moment in the saga of everything that transpires in the Duel of the Fates between, and the reason it's called Duel of the Fates, um, and what goes on with Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Darth Maul. It's incredible, and I will probably, unless something comes out that just blows that away at some point, which at this point it hasn't for me. But I'm probably gonna go to my grave thinking that this is the best lightsaber duel in the entire saga. And I don't know, like I feel like I'm rambling quite a bit, but just kind of everything in that movie hits me at once because it's so nostalgia driven for me, but also like I just remember everything really well about the first time I saw it, and it's the feelings I get are pretty similar when I watch it now. I look forward to watching the Phantom Menace again every time, and I've had to take a lot of feedback and criticism from friends or whoever when I defend it, or even just say I like it. Um, but I really do just appreciate like its spirit, its tone, its pace. Like it's a very brisk paced movie, and I think it doesn't really get a lot of credit for that. It's not boring, as the opening crawl would suggest. It's not that boring. Um, and even when they get to Coruscant and they kind of get bogged down in the political aspects of the Republic and everything, I don't really think that's boring either, um, because there's a lot at stake, specifically with Anakin, which you've made allusion to Jake Lloyd not being that good in this, and I completely agree. Um,
Yippee!
Yippee, are you an angel? Of
Now this is
yeah,
pod racing.
but the stakes are there through Qui Gon, and he's probably the character we care the most about in this, and I really do like his interactions with the Jedi Council and kind of what that holds for the future. And it really is kind of a reverse like Return of the Jedi, because Return of the Jedi itself, it was the conclusion of a saga, and it was the redemption of Anakin. Uh, this is like an explosive beginning to a saga, and it's like when Anakin was still innocent before the fall, and it's a really interesting way to open up the trilogy, but it makes sense in the grand scheme. And I don't know if people were expecting something to just be just like a New Hope or something similar to that, but what we got was this, and I think it very much makes sense. Your point about the intent of it, whether it's meant to be seen first or if it's meant to be seen after you've seen the originals, I think I agree with you that it definitely works better as a prequel because there are plenty of little moments in there that feel like, hey, this is for you that have seen the original trilogy. Like the first time Senator Palpatine's name is mentioned when he has his little hologram interrupted in Naboo. And it's like, oh, okay, Palpatine's in this. And we already kind of knew that because we'd seen Darth Sidious and go, oh, wow, I wonder who that is. Hear the voice. Uh, you know exactly who that is if you've seen the original trilogy. But then, like, 5 minutes later and you hear his name referenced, it's like, oh, okay, he's a senator at this point. He's not the emperor. So we're going to see how he falls, or I mean, not how he falls, how he rises to power.
The Phantom Menace himself.
Yes, exactly. And no, the Phantom Menace is not Jar Jar Binks. To anyone who feels that way, or Jake Lloyd, it is actually Palpatine or Sidious. But like, I agree. Before I go back to you, I definitely agree about the visual effects too, and I agree with what you said about it should have won the Academy Award over the Matrix. And like, people, if anyone's like having a hard reaction to that, like, calm down. Uh, the Matrix is great. I if you're asking me if I like the Matrix more than the Phantom Menace, the question is definitely, or the answer is definitely yes. The Matrix is a great movie, but that doesn't mean it has the best visual effects, and it does have great visual effects. But what you said is 100% correct in that all the advances that they made for this movie were monumental. I mean, there were no movies that looked like this before, not on this scale. And the digital character, of course, the fact that it was Jar Jar Binks, everyone like turned their nose up at it. But what happened, like, just 2 years later, or well, I guess 3 years later, like what big digital character kind of emerged from this technology, and it was Gollum in Lord of the Rings. And I don't think that would have happened if it weren't for the advances they made, that Lucas made over time, and especially what they accomplished in Phantom Menace.
And it still took 3.5 years later before you get the Two Towers.
Right.
And nobody's on the level of Lucas in advance.
Right. So it's that, and I also just the scale of, like, Gunga City, like you said. I mean, it's amazing, amazing visuals, and I still am impressed by it, and that's saying a lot. Um, Considering where we've come since then, 22 years later, um, where we are in terms of what we see in film. Uh, but I'm still impressed by the visuals of the Phantom Menace, and it is just a marvel in digital technology at the time, and really even but this, like, the stump work in it is great too. Like, people want to hate on it for having so much digital stuff. Like I said, watch the Duel of the Fates. This is one of the best choreographed fights of any kind I've ever seen. it's just, I don't know. It has so much going on. It's just it's too much fun. I think people need to stop hating on it.
Well, but you mentioned the stunt work in conjecture with what is digital. But how about a sequence that's entirely, well, not entirely, but a lot digital? Uh, in the pod race, you
Right.
referenced the video game,
Yeah.
but as a film sequence, that is absolutely incredible. That's a great action set piece. And I, far be it from me to, it's nitpick uh, different aspects. Like it's a great action sequence in a very digital way in 1999.
Right.
I, I yeah, I don't really understand. I don't know if people really know what they're talking about sometimes when they criticize some of the digital versus practical aspects. And there were a lot of miniatures too used throughout this movie. There's a lot of real tangible stuff, but I think the mixture of tech is really admirable throughout in this movie. I will say, like, thinking about the pod race and the sequence in particular, but also the whole movie, the sound design is just unreal. Ben Burt,
Yeah.
one of the people that was there since the beginning and doing the sound still in the Phantom Menace. The sound work in the Phantom Menace is terrific, and the pod race just happens to be a particular highlight. It's the stop the score sequence.
Right.
You just get immersed in the sound design, and it's really awesome. But I'll criticize the genius that is Ben Burt because I don't think he should have been an editor.
Right.
And that's one instance where I'll move over more to the camp of people that said Lucas may have surrounded himself with too many yes folks, uh, too many yes men around him. And you look at the original trilogy, there are a lot of collaborators that had become more critical or stepped in with their own ideas more. And I'm not saying discredit to Lucas because I think Lucas is awesome, but I don't think he should have made his buddy a film editor.
Right.
That wasn't really, in my opinion, the best choice. And one of the problems I have with the Phantom Menace is that it's a little bit lumbering in parts, and you tighten up that edit in the movie could be even better. I don't think the movie is boring. I'm still with you on that point. I don't think it's nearly as dry as people make it out to be, but I do think it kind of lumbers just a little bit in terms of its pacing and editing at times. And you add into that Jake Lloyd and Natalie Portman, and I think Natalie Portman's a terrific actor, but in this movie is a little bit too droll.
Right.
And you got the heart of the movie with Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor. I mean, Liam Neeson, I don't know if we've even said his name yet because we've mentioned Qui-Gon.
Right.
But Liam Neeson is terrific in this movie. And even though he was only in one movie, fully at least, without just like tiny snippets of audio and subsequent appearances and voice acting in the animated show. But actually, the impact that he makes in one movie is just top notch. And Ewan McGregor is a great young Obi-Wan. Like getting to see him as a little bit more brash young Obi-Wan is terrific, especially like in that final duel.
Right.
That sequence is unreal in its staging. And there was one moment, and this is kind of silly, but I was playing Star Wars VR, um, Vader Unleashed, and I was Vader Immortal. I was trying to remember the name of it, Vader Immortal, and that you can just play in the lightsaber dojo. And there's one moment where it kind of glitched for a second for me, so I did the Qui-Gon Jinn and got all zen, got down on a knee, and just kind of paused there to take a breath while I waited for the
Wow.
internet to kick back into gear. Like exercise some patience.
Right.
While Darth Maul is like a caged animal. But yeah, you have Liam Neeson making a huge impact. Ewan McGregor is a terrific young Obi-Wan. Ray Park in a visual performance, and obviously with his fighting, is absolutely standout and terrific. But I think there's a world where you could have had a better Anakin Skywalker and a better Padme Amidala,
Right.
because that stuff doesn't make as big an impact as it could have. Like when you have the reveal that, oh no, this has been my decoy all along, and it's like that doesn't impact as much because we haven't had as big a connection with these characters as we could have, dramatically speaking.
Right.
And so by comparison with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and all that, like it's just you have a little bit that's lacking there in terms of its connective tissue. And I think obviously that's something that has made an impact on some people's impression of this movie as a whole, is the sense of personality at every corner.
Right.
That there is that little bit that's lacking, I think, but I think you could exaggerate that point in the effect that it has on the movie, because there's so much that's still inspiring throughout the movie. Mention again the world building, but also just the part in the story that we're at. We're at the most fantasy that Star Wars movies have ever been, really, in terms of really feeling like a kind of fable. You actually have a kid as a central figure. You have the devil as the villain.
Right.
It has that sort of feel to it with something underneath the surface, that Phantom Menace that's lingering there, ready to come out in future parts of the story and get even darker as it goes along. But meanwhile, you get to end this one with the really big celebration that's bright and exciting. And that's a reason enough to mention the score to this movie, which is John Williams at some of his finest. This is absolutely incredible, building off of his original score, but doing totally new things with it, which works alongside the world building. I think he was inspired by what he was seeing and kind of bringing us all home. The Duel of the Fates, the
right
absolute joy in the finale with the Naboo Gungans. It's one of his better scores. He's made so many great scores that I'm hesitant to say one of his best, just because there's so many great ones. But yeah, it's one of his best film scores.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because there's so many I mean, just Duel of the Fates alone, you could sit and go, yeah, this is one of the best the best pieces of music John Williams has ever recorded. And you could just have Duel of the Fates and everything else kind of just be standard. And I think a lot of people would go, yeah, this is great. But there were so many new themes. There were so many different pieces that he made for this that just completely different styles of music, and yet still Star Wars. And it wasn't just retreads of what was in the original trilogy. And I think that played a huge deal in the film itself, just like the music did in the original trilogy too. But I think it pumped energy. Some of the things, like you said, might be lacking in the editing and the pacing to a degree. I don't think it makes up, but it boosts some of those things with the music. And I I actually was listening to the score the other day after I watched the movie for this, and just thinking about how if I had to make like a top five scores of John Williams, this would probably be the highest Star Wars, or at least one of them. It would be in my top five of his, and
I would have to think about it because it might be for me too. But
it's close. That's why I put a little asterisk in there, like maybe, because I mean, well, his Star Wars music is just so good, but there's just so many things that come from Phantom Menace that I really like. And talking about specifics, I think the pod race scene is one of the best sequences in the whole saga. Honestly, I love it. It's fun. It's an absolute blast. I think it's Lucas playing in his wheelhouse, because he loves speed, he loves cars, he loves racing, and this is him really getting a chance to sink his teeth into that with a racing sequence. Like I said, it had the video game and had the characters, the other racers, and Anakin, of course, but Sebulba, um, Ben Quadraneros, just all these interesting looking characters. Sebulba is really kind of cool and terrible at the same time. He's a jerk, but his pod racer is really cool. It doesn't really make any sense. It's like a massive, almost like semi truck type thing. But it's really cool seeing him uh, kind of almost win the race, and then Anakin kind of scraps, pulls together, and wins. And it would be cool. It would be better if the performance of Anakin was better. They'd be a little more invested. Um, but I still think it works. I still think the sequence works. Natalie Portman does kind of fall flat in this movie in particular, and again, I think that may or may not have to do with that. And that might be the weakest part. I think is the writing. Some of the story choices in this, and uh, like the whole handmaiden story arc and the way it was handled, it's like, yeah, obviously that's Natalie Portman. I know this is Queen Amidala, so I know this is her, unless she's a twin or something. It's kind of, I'm not going to say convoluted, but it's almost pointless. And again, like, you're not so invested in them. Um, for other reasons too. So not to crap on her, but I do think that her and Jake Lloyd are probably like some of the weaker elements of it, not just their performances, but their kind of the way their characters are written and how it all plays out. But I'm gonna talk about Ahmad Best real quick because he was bullied, uh, almost killed himself. I mean, really, from the pressure of the hate that he got for being Jar Jar Binks. And it's terrible. I hate that it was at that point, and I hate that people just can't separate actor from performance and can't just, if you don't like something, great. You don't have to say something ruined your life, especially when it's a movie. Obviously, your house burns down, your life might be ruined or feel that way. A movie comes out that you don't like, your life is not ruined. I don't care if it's Star Wars and it's something you grew up with. I grew up with it too. And there have been entries in the series that I did not like, and my life was still intact afterwards. So that's one of like the extremes of people's opinions that came from this movie in particular. I've never really understood, and why you would go after someone for playing a character. I've never understood that. But I honestly think that Ahmad Best did a good job. I think Jar Jar is kind of funny. I I uh, I do think he's annoying. I do think he's silly. I do think he's ridiculous. I also think that is absolutely the intention of the character. Um, for for good reason. Um, and you can say, well, oh, he's just there for comic relief and it falls flat. I think you're wrong. Um, and I think Ahmad Best did a good job. Ray Park, Darth Maul, again, touch on this a little bit for what you already said, but great martial artist. Uh, really has a really cool presence. He's much better as Darth Maul than he is as Toad in X Men. I just had to throw that in there. But I really like Ray Park. He's really cool. Um, but again, like I can't sing enough praises of the Duel of the Fates. And like Darth Maul was this kid, of course, like I'm 13 years old. I'm buying completely in to this. Was so stoked for Darth Maul, like just so cool, such a cool looking villain, and of course this is his one movie where he's actually part of the action and everything. We'll touch on another appearance he makes later on and kind of talk more about his role in the canon and other things later on when we watch Solo. Um, but in Phantom Menace, for all practical purposes and within the context of the trilogy, this is his, one and done. And I think that it's very impressive. He definitely has a presence. I do not think that his dispatching is cheap. I do not think that it is unearned. People are like, oh, he dies too easy. Like he kills Qui-Gon, and the fight is incredible, and it lasts a good portion of time. I've never understood that complaint. It's like the moment when Obi-Wan, uh, takes him out. It's quick, yeah, but that's kind of the point. Um, it's kind of Obi-Wan taking this and using to his advantage this one last attempt to survive. It's really cool. And I remember my little 12-year-old 12, 13. I think I definitely was 12. I think I said I was 13 a few minutes ago. I was 12 going on 13. um my little 12-year-old mind was blown seeing him fall in half uh into the pit. I thought that was so cool. um just just really fun. Liam Neeson was awesome in this movie. I really like him as Qui-Gon Jinn. I really like Qui-Gon Jinn. I think he's one of the best characters in the whole saga. I really wish we got to see more of him, and I wish that certain things, and I think I will talk about this when we watch episode 3. I wish that certain things that happened off camera were not off camera. I wish that we got to see certain aspects of his character later on. And in a sense, we do in the Clone Wars, to a degree, but I wish, like in the context of the movie trilogy, I wish we could have seen more of him. But he has an impact. He definitely adds a lot to this entry. Um, we got to talk about. I want to give a shout out to Brian Blessed, who is a awesome uh, kind of stage actor, and also has been in a lot of different movies too. For me, most notably, he's Prince Fulton, and in Flash Gordon has the line "Gordon's alive." Like he's great. Um, and if you've never seen that movie, you've probably heard that in the Queen song "Flash." Um, but he's the actor that plays Boss Nass in this, and I love his performance. As silly as it is, um, but I think he does a great job with his performance as Boss Nass. And of course, that's just one of the things that last in my memory. With as goofy as it is, I really enjoy it. Um, and I agree with what you said about Ewan McGregor. I think he is a perfect young Obi-Wan, and I think he exhibits that more as the trilogy goes on, especially when we get further in. And he didn't have as much to work with in terms of screen time, because he really was kind of a supporting character in this, and naturally, and he comes into it a little more each film. Um, but I do think even early on in Phantom Menace, he's great. I love just how this movie opens when they are in the Trade Federation ship, and his line, "I have a bad feeling about this," of course, echoing a motif from the original trilogy, and just keeps going. Um, but I love that opening little battle with the battle droids, and I love the battle droids. I think they're cool. I still Roger. Yeah, they have that. It's just so unique, and like you mentioned earlier, the battle in Naboo. And I love Naboo too. Like I love the planets in this movie. That's another thing about the the world building. I just love like the planets and everything in this one. And yeah, we spend a lot of time on Tatooine, and it's familiar. Um, but it's a different side of Tatooine. We're not back in Mos Eisley. We're in Mos Espa, and it's different. It's not just carbon copy paste of Mos Eisley. There's different flavor to it. And then Naboo is just this beautiful planet, and the almost Italian style architecture, and the waterfalls and the swamps, and then Coruscant is incredible. But what I wanted to touch on was that battle with the Gungans and battle droids. Like, in addition to the lightsaber duel that's going on, we have this battle going on at the same time, and it's very cool and very visually stimulating, and it's beautifully done. And people may hate it because Jar Jar is at the center of it, but I absolutely have a blast with it every time. I think the worst part of the finale is definitely the space battle, where Anakin just kind of accidentally saves the day, and then is very, very, kind of passive about it. Like, this is pod racing. I'll try spinning. That's a good trick. Yippee! It's bad. I mean, it's not the worst thing I've ever seen. It's still a fun little sequence, and I love the design of the Naboo starfighters. I think they look really cool, and the Trade Federation ships too. Just the design wise, it's incredible. They did such a good job with it looking completely different than anything they had done before, and it wasn't just doing the same thing over and over. But I do agree with you that there are some problems with this movie, and I think they are definitely evident, and Anakin is part of it. I do think that some ways it's the performance, and I don't want to pile on Jake Lloyd because I think that he's had a lot of troubles in his life, and kind of in a similar vein to Ahmad Best. I think that he kind of faced a lot of negative pressure that came from this movie and affected his personal life. And while Ahmad Best kind of got to come out on the other side and be, kind of have a happy other side to it, I don't know for sure because I don't know him personally or anything like that, obviously, but I think Jake Lloyd's had a lot of problems, and they may or may not still be ongoing. And I don't think that they all stem just from Phantom Menace, but I think that he's faced a lot of feedback and negative hate because of it. And I don't think that's fair, again, like, you're doing a job, you're an actor, whether you do the best job or the worst job or whatever, like, that doesn't reflect on your personal life. You shouldn't have to have it constantly hanging over you everywhere you go. Nobody, it's like if you have an accident at work, you don't want that following you everywhere you go. Let work be at work, and your personal life be your personal life. And I know that's different being an actor when everybody sees your work in their free time. It's a different thing, but I do not want to add to the pile on him, but I do think that it is kind of a shallow wooden performance. But again, he was a child actor. I understand. I'm a lot more forgiving of it than most people, but I also think that one thing I don't like, and I do think the chosen one, I think it fits, like that he's kind of this messiah, and where we go with that, what happens. But I think I think there's some lazy ideas here, like with him being a virgin birth. And again, like I do think that off the camera, some things that are presented with it, that he was actually willed into being by Palpatine, which is with the midi chlorians. I wish that was a little bit more further explored in the films. I mean, not seeing it, but like actually addressed. I think, oh, there's no father. The way that's delivered is just kind of so drab. Like, oh, there's no father. I raised him. Blah blah blah. Like, okay, let's just that's a pretty profound thing. Let's just casually say that. I'm not a huge fan of kind of those details. And again, like some of the politics and some of the stuff with Queen Amidala, I'm not a huge fan of. And I think that takes the movie down a tick. And also, again, like the finale, just the again, that comes back to Anakin too. We could have gotten a better deal with Anakin, I think. But overall, I definitely enjoy this. I really like this movie. I give it a B plus, and that's they're like, oh, you just give it a B. You don't like it that much. No, B plus is good. That's better than what most people would give it. I do enjoy this quite a bit. I do think it is a tick down from the original trilogy for sure. But man, this is a fun way to start the prequel trilogy.
I also want to mention by name Ian McDermott,
Yes.
who is terrific in this. Because he's a phantom, I guess he's easy to kind of skip over, but he's an important figure in this movie and throughout the saga. He does a terrific job. I also want to just mention, like a lot has been said about the special editions and new versions of movies, and I don't have a problem with new versions of things, but I wish we could still have the original, what was put out in theaters.
Right.
And the Phantom Menace doesn't get as much traction in that conversation, but I've watched it on Disney Plus, where you can watch it in 4K, which is cool. But it's also has new sequences and parts to it. Like it has an extended lap in the pod racing, which I don't mind being added, and additional bits with the introduction of characters before the race and so forth,
Right.
that weren't there in the theatrical version. But also, and this is really the important part in terms of change, is digital Yoda.
Yes. Yeah.
I get it. I get why they wanted the digital Yoda to fit in with the rest of the prequels, but I don't. It's tricky because, like, the worst part about these changes with the special editions and with the digital Yoda and Phantom Menace and so on is that when they make these changes, they're not putting a full amount of time and effort into it like they would for the feature film itself.
Right.
And that's frustrating because it takes time to make the visual effects right. And this kind of bleeds over a little bit into Attack of the Clones, because on the behind the scenes of Attack of the Clones, you have part of it where Lucas is pouring over the digital Yoda, because this was technically the first time they did digital Yoda. And they had the very end of the movie where Yoda is contemplative and he's upset, but he's and heartbroken, but there's like this mixture of emotions, complexity happening that they needed to convey in a digital character. And at first they made him look too sad, and Lucas like, oh, come on, no, he looks pathetic, like you need to give him a little bit more subtlety in the performance. But when you look at the digital Yoda in Phantom Menace, they don't put that amount of time into all of his expressions throughout. Instead, it's just kind of like generic digital Yoda.
Right.
They don't actually try to give him much of a performance. It's pretty blank, and he's obviously not a huge part of the movie in general, but he still plays an important part.
Yeah.
When he's there. And I wish they could have put more time into it, but I also wish we could just have the original puppet back.
Yeah.
I don't know, and have some issues with the puppet too. The puppet design from the original theatrical release wasn't perfect either, but I don't know. I wish we could just have that version back too. It's a little bit tricky territory there, but it bothers me a bit. Regardless of which, I actually give this movie an A-. That's often a teeter-totter between A- and B+ for some things. Some movies live on that level. To me, this movie is great in enough ways that I actually put it in that A- territory. The parts that I love about it are just spectacular, and in a really rich way too. Really appreciate this movie a whole lot. But I think it's time we can move on to episode 2, Attack of the Clones, especially considering how long we've spent just talking about Phantom Menace. So it's definitely time.
Right.
Definitely time we can move on to episode 2.
I will not let this republic be split in two. My negotiations will not fail.
If they do, there aren't enough Jedi to protect the Republic. We're keepers of the peace, not soldiers.
You know I don't like it when you do that.
Sorry, Master. I forgot you don't like flying.
Well, you've lost him.
If you'll excuse me.
I hate it when he does that.
The dark side clouds everything. In grave danger you are. Begun this Clone War has.
This movie came out when I was graduating high school, and I actually got into line for the midnight show right after my last day of high school. And it was, good time with my friends, just waiting in line for the midnight show, and just really celebratory kind of feeling. This movie is actually the movie I've seen the most in the theaters, because I saw Attack of the Clones midnight show opening weekend with my parents. I saw it about a month later with my sister, just because we went in a church youth group trip, one time, and they're like, oh, let's just go to the movies after this big long day, and let's go see either Spider-Man or Star Wars. And they tossed a coin in the air, and I used the Force, and we got to see Attack of the Clones rather than Spider-Man. And then about half a year later, they released that movie in IMAX.
Right.
And I got to see Attack of the Clones in IMAX. So that's 5 times, which is your same number as well. The most you've seen a movie in the theaters is 5. But for me, it's with Attack of the Clones. And it's kind of happenstantial that it was 5 times. But nonetheless, it was this exciting event, an exciting period of my life, obviously, leaving high school. And then when I saw it in IMAX, I was in college. And I'll never forget, too, my first roommate was a big Star Trek fan, to the point of not liking Star Wars. And never seen Star Wars, refused to.
Right.
The Star Trek's better, and I'm like, dude, I like both. It's cool. You could like both. He's like, no, you're a Star Wars person. I'm a Star Trek person. We're at war. And at one point, I had Attack of the Clones going, was watching it on my computer, and he said, "Oh, that looks really cool. What is that?" I'm like, "You turd." It's Star Wars. Haha. But anyway, no, like this movie holds a special place for me in terms of the time of my life. But I will, and I know this isn't the feeling for you, because we'll get there eventually. This is my least favorite Star Wars movie. And I will say that in terms of like new versions of the movie, I really wish that the IMAX release got an official home video version. I wish more people could see that IMAX cut, because it is a better movie. It is a better movie in IMAX, because at the time they didn't have the digital IMAX, and they hadn't re-engineered the projectors like they did for Dark Knight Rises.
Right.
So that they could show a longer movie in IMAX film. So the maximum that they could handle was 2 hours. And this is a long movie. So they had to cut over 20 minutes. And part of that was the end credits. You can get rid of a whole lot of time if you just put a bunch of names on an IMAX screen.
Right.
But they still had to cut a lot of movie too. And yeah, it was a sharper movie. I still remember how much sharper it was even then. Like, yeah, I think that's the superior cut. And at the time, I was a bigger fan than I am now. And I don't even hate the movie now. I just, I think it lumbers through parts of it. And I will say I like Hayden Christensen. I don't dislike him the way some people do. But as much as I think he's fine, I think his storyline, and again, Natalie Portman is better in this movie as well. Like, I think she's a much better Padme in Attack of the Clones than she was in Phantom Menace. So that's fine, but their storyline isn't.
Right.
Their storyline kind of drags, and so much has been said about his comparison between her and sand, and how he doesn't like sand. Really bad romantic dialogue, which is true. There's plenty bad there, but I think just in general, like the excuse to like have him tag along with her and stuff, like it's just kind of lazy in terms of its execution. I don't think it's that great of a storyline. But meanwhile, you have Obi-Wan, and it's a great sequence. I really like the mystery side of his storyline, and his fight with Jango Fett is terrific. And even when it goes into space, it's an incredible space battle. That stuff is absolutely terrific and exciting. And speaking of great sound design as well, that sound design throughout the entire movie, but you have that space battle between Jango and Obi-Wan, seismic blast, that is awesome. I still get excited when that bit comes up, because it's so much fun. I really like the Obi-Wan is a spy and James Bond kind of stuff. I think that's a well-handled storyline, and then you compare it to the Anakin Padme storyline, and it's just like it's like it didn't know what to do with them. to the point that they even shot really close to the movie's release, that whole assembly line fight. And the assembly line fight is just, it's okay as a sequence, but it feels tacked on in the sense of, I guess we just need another action bit,
Yeah.
as opposed to actually having something dramatically built well for those characters. It's like we don't know what to do with them in terms of drama, so let's just put them in another fight, put them in another action sequence.
Yeah.
And this action sequence is on an assembly line. Okay, I guess. It's kind of just, assembly line is almost like the best way of looking at it. It's like, oh, I got another Star Wars. Here you go. Put it on the assembly line. But I don't want to damn this movie too much. It's fun in a lot of ways too, and has stuff that I really enjoyed. It's exciting. That final stretch of the movie is pretty terrific. All that action is really well staged, but dramatically it doesn't end as impactfully as it should have either.
Right.
There's something that's kind of like lacking in impact as the movie ends. And if you compare it to The Empire Strikes Back, which also ends without conclusion, the difference is The Empire Strikes Back does end dramatically.
Right.
It ends with a lot of character stake. And the end of Attack of the Clones doesn't feel as dramatic.
No.
In terms of what's happening with the characters. There's just something just a little bit lacking there, and I also had to flash back to the very beginning of the movie because there's something that I noticed at the time that still stuck with me over the years. Because every time I see a new Star Wars movie, I'm watching for this. I've watched for the same thing. After the opening crawl, the camera tilts up rather than down, and no other Star Wars movie tilts up. And it's like this weird feeling, and I almost have to believe that it was intentional. That it's like this, even if people don't know that they saw it, that you're thinking like something's amiss here. And there's this air of kind of mystery underneath Attack of the Clones. That part I kind of like. I like the feeling of something kind of being wrong.
Right.
But I wish that the movie as a whole developed that more in all ways.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah, it just, there's something that's not quite right in the development of parts of this story.
Right.
And parts of it that are really involving, and parts of it that just feel like they just aren't as excellent. And before I pass it on, I want to get lost a little bit just talking about something technical that's important, because in terms of innovation, this movie does something that was huge for where we are now in movies, and that's using a digital camera.
Right.
And some people would argue that it's before its time, in the sense of maybe they shouldn't have done it yet. And there were a few movies, like Robert Rodriguez shooting Once Upon a Time in Mexico and his Spy Kids sequels with the digital cameras that Lucas was showing off at the Attack of the Clones. But Lucas was the pioneer here, like pushing the industry to go to digital. But I actually think he's right, and I like that choice. But at the same time, just being picky a tiny bit, speaking of it being maybe before its time, it's at 1080p kind of high definition, and what's kind of funny to me is Disney Plus says 4K, But like this movie isn't in 4K. It wasn't shot in a high enough resolution.
Right.
And it's the least detailed Star Wars movie, just literally in terms of the way they shot it. The sound can absolutely have a higher definition, but uh, the Atmos soundtrack is terrific now in a modern age. But that it's definitely not 4K. But even more important than just the resolution, though, is the dynamic range that was capable at the time. And I think Lucas was making intentional choices on the worlds of this movie because we go back to Tatooine, deserts, and then we're on like Geonosis with the rocky terrain and
Right.
not so colorful creatures, bug creatures that are on Geonosis, and then we're on Camino, which is stormy and dark and watery and very monotone. This is not a colorful movie. The most colorful sequence in the entire movie is a lot of digital stuff happening with the Coruscant sort of stuff. The Coruscant stuff is like when they're actually like flying through the city.
Yeah.
But even that's like a neon kind of color scape. This movie has the most unique look of any of the Star Wars movies because of that choice. And I could pick on it a little bit, but I also kind of love a lot of this style because they have this kind of film noir touch to some of it. There's a lot of interesting use of light and shadow, light peering in from windows and stuff. Like it's all very stark. This isn't a bright movie, but it is unique in some of its visual choices. And sure, it could be nice if it had more resolution. And there are parts where especially people's skin tones look a little blah, where it could be more range in the skin tones. But I do think the movie has a unique look to it. It's
Yeah.
on top of obviously a lot of classical influences like the Searchers. Whenever Anakin's about to try to rescue his mom, there's some really cool choices along the way, in spite of some aspects maybe being lacking in terms of, again, its resolution, but especially its dynamic range. I'm curious on that note, but also just in general, your impressions on Attack of the Clones.
Oh, this one, just going back, this was a little different, I think, than the build up to Phantom Menace, because at the time of Phantom Menace, it was the first Star Wars movie in a long time, so there was a whole lot of hype. Nobody could really believe, they're finally making these prequels. And Attack of the Clones, it's the second in a trilogy, so there was still hype and there was still a whole lot building up to it, but it wasn't the same as Phantom Menace, so it wasn't quite as much anticipation as there was. I did not see Attack of the Clones at the midnight show. I saw it opening night though, and you mentioned Spider-Man, which ended up being it's interesting to note that Attack of the Clones was the first instance of a Star Wars movie not being the number one box office of the year.
Right.
And that was the year of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. And in Paducah, which is where I grew up, Spider-Man was the last movie I saw at the old movie theater there, and Attack of the Clones was the first movie I saw at the time brand new Cinemark they opened, uh, which is the one that's there now. So I suppose it's old now, but but it was that was the first movie I saw there was Attack of the Clones, and Spider-Man was the last I saw at the old one. So uh, it was a fun summer. This way to start off the summer really was those two movies. But I remember the trailers for Attack of the Clones being a lot more. You already kind of alluded to the mystery, but they were a lot more vague and very much more, very much more teasers than actual trailers. And I think, in a way, that was a good thing. And I think I definitely see why this is yours and a lot of other people's least favorite uh, Star Wars movies, and it's not that it's very very high on my list either, but I do like a lot of things about this movie, and I do, and again, you did too. But the I'll start off with the problem, and of course, it's the love story, and I think it just never has a natural flow to it. I think that's the problem, and you can say it's intentional. You could say it's trying to be like an old, corny, clunky cereal all you want, but if something doesn't work and it's bad, it's bad. And I think that the Padme Anakin stuff definitely falls flat. It's definitely awkward. It's definitely kind of cringy. It's hard to watch. It was hard to watch when it first came out. I remember the scene where they're sitting in the living room or whatever you will call it in front of the fireplace. Um, it's just one of the most awkward moments I've ever seen in a movie. It's one of those where you kind of turn because you don't want to watch it. It's like you don't want to be caught watching this in public. Like you're embarrassed for them or something. It's very awkward, and I definitely don't hate on Hayden Christensen as much as a lot of people have, because I think he's talented. I think he's a good actor. I think what they went with, what they chose, the takes they chose. Because if you go back and you look at the special features and you see some of like the alternate takes of um, that he had, he kind of had more charisma and a little more sincerity in some of them, and they kind of went with a more, not going to say robotic, but a different style. And I think it was the style that George wanted, obviously. And people, what the acting is more, from a certain time period of serials where everything's a little more matter of fact and campy and things like that. And I think that choice didn't really work. And again, that's more of the style than it is Hayden Christensen. I think he could have, given a really great charismatic performance, and I feel like he should have, because I feel like we should have been a lot more invested in Anakin than we ended up being. I do think he did get to do a little bit more of that in Revenge of the Sith. which we'll talk about next episode. But I do think that it's very hard to connect to him when he has some of these big moments in this movie, whether it's finding his mom, Shmi, who is no longer just casually saying that there was no father, but she's now been killed by Sand people. What a turn of events. But I think the tragedy of that revenge that he takes could have been much more meaningful, carried a lot more weight to it if we didn't think he was just some kind of punk kid, which is kind of the narrative that we get, that he's very ungrateful, he's arrogant. I don't have a problem with those being traits that he has, but we never really get to see the great Anakin Skywalker that everybody loved, at least not in this movie specifically. And we get like these, you don't even really get to see the sense that he and Obi-Wan are close, like they tell you, but they're always like at each other's throats. But again, this is kind of a moment in time that we're catching them in, so I can forgive it a little more. But that's kind of one of the big key things that's lacking in or to me anyway, and that makes like a lot of this fall flat and drag. And we spend a huge section of the movie with Anakin and Padme and no filler or no filter, no buffer character to kind of keep it interesting for us with them. So it's hard, it's hard to sit through, especially when they're riding those potato cows or whatever you want to call them. And it's just the weird creatures, and rolling around in the fields and talking about politics. And it's just very awkward and forced. And I don't think it's the worst thing I've ever seen. And it is kind of fun to watch in that cringy sort of way, but it's still kind of hard to watch those parts. But I think that's where the key like fault in this movie lies, is that like a lot of it comes back to that missing element. Things I like is just kind of the action of the movie is really, because I think that even aside from Geonosis, because I think a lot of people acknowledge that sequence is pretty great, but a lot of it kind of gets overlooked now. That there are some really fun sequences in this. Of course, there's the chase in Coruscant, which you've already alluded to. And it is the most colorful scene in the movie, and it's very fun. And I like I even like that is kind of one moment I really like the banner between Anakin and Obi-Wan, and I like the flow of that scene. I really enjoyed the best part of this movie is Obi-Wan and his plot, and that leads us to Camino, which is a really cool kind of stormy ocean planet. And we get to see the clones. We get to see Jango Fett, young Boba Fett. Get all these interesting through lines. We get this mystery. We get this kind of noir-esque tale with him kind of going and catching this trail. He goes to that diner and talks to his friend Dax, who I think is just cool. It's a cool diner owner, and their little conversation there. I love that bit. But where he ends up going and trying to find these Kaminoans and find the clones after he couldn't find the planet in the Jedi archives and all that. Another big piece of the puzzle is the younglings are introduced in this movie. Um, it's kind of funny. Little scene with Yoda that they can't find that planet, and it's an interesting part of this lore because now it's clear that somebody's tampered with things and somebody has deliberately hidden all this information, and there's a nice little mystery to it. Of course, we get led to Count Dooku, the wonderful Christopher Lee, and what a cool character. Just a very cool villain. And of course it's Christopher Lee, so he's going to be cool. But they definitely made him great. I really enjoy him in the movie. I do wish that there was a little bit more to it. Even in the grand scheme of things, I wish there were little hints of parts to his character. Like him kind of trying to get Obi-Wan to join him. And some of the things he says regarding Qui-Gon and some other things. I wish there was like a little more to all that. I wish, you couldn't just take it at surface level. I wish that we got to see a little bit more of kind of his schemes and his motivations, because we really don't see his motivations. We know that he's working for Sidious at the end of the movie, and we know that part, and we know that he's the dark side of the Force, but in terms of like his own true motivations, we don't get to see too much of that, and I do wish there was more to it.
Well, even before we know he works for Sidious, we always know he's evil.
Right.
And it could have been cool if there was a little bit mystery behind whether he was even good or bad.
Right. That too. And they almost did have that for a little bit, because before the fight, yes, he was evil, but it was a little less obvious how evil he was until he starts using Force lightning and he's got the red lightsaber brandished and all of that. Like when Obi-Wan's initially kind of investigating him, it's a much more interesting movie, I think. And then when he's kind of the Saturday morning cartoon villain at the end, it's still fun, and I still enjoy the movie. The ending, now that we're kind of there, like the Battle of Geonosis is fun, and it's one of the best sequences of. It's probably best sequence of the movie easily. Really cool. Some really cool bits, but it could have been even better if we were more invested in a lot of things. But it's just a really cool built up sequence. I thought the use of the clones was just cool. I kind of knew that that's where the stormtroopers were going to come from, but kind of the whole the way they ended up coming about, I don't think anybody really anticipated. I don't think anyone really thought, oh, they're going to be like the Army of the Republic and they're going to be good guys for a while until something else happens. Wasn't really what we were expecting, or at least, leading up to the movie. So that was a very cool aspect of it as well. And I really enjoyed that, and getting to see Mace Windu, who we barely mentioned, if we even mentioned him, in Phantom Menace. But Samuel L. Jackson kind of begging George to let him actually use his lightsaber. in this movie, and he got his chance, and it's cool. I think it's much better in Revenge of the Sith when he gets to, but it's still cool seeing him get to be in action. And what is one thing I don't like? And, well, actually, let me just kind of wrapping up. Let me talk about the the final duel with Dooku. I things I really liked and things I really didn't. Like, I liked the dialogue. I liked, even when he was a little less interesting and kind of doing the evil monologuing and stuff. I liked that aspect of it, because that was one thing that wasn't in the Phantom Menace duel, was kind of the banner, or not the banner, but the back and forth, the verbal taunting and things like that we got to see Vader do so well in the original trilogy. Dooku is kind of doing that in this, and I really enjoy that. Um, I think that things happen a little too quickly. I think things could have, like, Obi-Wan kind of gets taken out of the game, like with flesh wound, like the essentially a paper cut when it comes to lightsaber wounds, and way too quickly. And then Anakin just, there's some cool bits, but I think he just gets defeated way too quick. But I think one thing I just have always felt, I've never been a fan of the Yoda fight in this, and I feel like it's almost just an excuse to use the digital technology to show it off, to show off digital Yoda. And I get why people had a blast with that in the theater, but it felt off to me. I never really liked it, and I wish, in the grand scheme of things, we never saw Yoda pull out his lightsaber until Revenge of the Sith. I wish that was the first time, because I feel like it would have been a bigger moment. It's still a big moment, but it doesn't take away from that. But I feel like it would have been a more important and maybe play out much better. But I don't know. I've never been a big fan of that, and I don't think it's the worst thing. I just think it's kind of gimmicky, and it kind of takes me out of the flow of the movie, and it kind of keeps that sequence as a whole from really, like, excelling to me. It kind of takes the steam out of it. And another thing about the movie, the score is good. John Williams does a really good job again, but it's not as good as Phantom Menace. But I mean, I think he really knocked that one out of the park. But Across the Stars, just that theme, though, is one of the best themes of the whole saga. So we still have, like, a lot of things going for it. But there's just so much that kind of doesn't work and falls flat, that this one definitely kind of falls in that B- territory, which is where I fall on it. And I like it. I like Attack of the Clones. I enjoy watching it. But it definitely is, when it comes to Star Wars, on the weaker spectrum. So I definitely don't disagree with all that. Because I do kind of fall that way as well. It's just later there were Star Wars movies I liked less. But for a long time, it was my least favorite Star Wars movie. But again, like, I definitely don't hate it. I have a good time with it, and I think we've talked about a lot of fun things with it. But there are just way too many issues that kind of keep it from just taking off.
No, I end up with a solid B.
Okay.
And so obviously we're really close with both of these movies in terms of where we settle. I guess I'm just a notch above for both of them.
Right.
In terms of what we would actually call, but in terms of what we're saying about the movies, I think we're sharing very similar sentiments. Sometimes our actual definitions on where a movie sits in a letter grade can be slightly different, but we'll definitely have movies down the line where we don't agree, which will be fun to talk about too.
Right.
I think it'll be fun to talk about things we're even further apart on. But as far as Attack of the Clones, though, I think yeah, it's just this a B minus is fair for it because it's not a bad movie. It's good. It has fun parts to it. In a way, it's one of the most frustrating movies in that range, though, just because there's stuff that really works and then the other stuff that's really frustrating
Right.
and not good. So it's almost more of an average of the best and worst qualities in the movies as opposed to it just being a solid B all throughout.
Yeah.
That's my real feeling on it. Is like I said, the IMAX cut is a superior movie, and it's because you cut out a lot of the lesser parts.
Right.
But even though the IMAX cut was a stronger movie, it still doesn't make it
Right.
the best movie because there's something lacking in the overall arc of the movie.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a complete story. There are interesting aspects of it, but there's just not enough development in the story itself. And usually I'm in agreement with Lucas's story at the very least, even if I have other issues. When it's Lucas developing a story, I'm usually like at least on board with the idea conceptually. But this one I'm like, I don't really know if they had much of a story.
Right.
There are interesting things and just not enough that we see. It'd be fun to see more of, you talked about Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship. It'd be nice if we actually got to see more of them
Yeah.
connecting with each other. That would be a way to boost this movie. I definitely go back to Dooku, who I enjoy as a character, but I almost enjoy him more in theory and because I love Christopher Lee than anything we actually see from him.
Right.
It'd be nice to have more of that mystery. If maybe Obi-Wan was actually convinced at first that Dooku has something to say,
Right.
and then he gets betrayed by Dooku.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that would be interesting. But instead, he's immediately captured.
Yeah.
And Dooku's like, oh, I'm doing my best, son. I'll get you free from here. And it's like, I don't believe you. You're evil, and I'm
Right.
captured. I'm in prison. Like that. Nothing about this is that convincing.
Right.
That you might be on the side of good. Even bringing Qui-Gon's name into it doesn't change the dynamic.
No.
So it'd be fun if that was actually developed more. And all that I'm saying now still doesn't make up for what do you do with Anakin,
Right.
In terms of the overall story and where he goes. And that storyline is like, oh, let's put Anakin and Padme off to the sidelines, essentially.
Yeah.
For a little bit, out of the main plot. And there should have been a way to give them more of a story. And sure, he gets to have these nightmares and have an important storyline in terms of him being concerned about wanting to stop death. That's an important storyline. I just wish it was developed more into the overall narrative as opposed to just feeling too much like a little side quest.
Right.
But in terms of the thrust of his story, it pays off really well once you especially get to Revenge of the Sith and you see Anakin's motivations.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just something missing. So I feel like a B is a solid B is where I'd go with this movie. And that's obviously, since I'm saying that it's my least favorite Star Wars movie, that means that I at least like all the Star Wars movies. But nonetheless, it's an interesting start to these prequels, these much maligned prequels. I think that we're both in agreement that even Attack of the Clones deserves more credit than it gets.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and I think I've seen time kind of come back in favor with the prequels because you have people that grew up with them,
Right.
and then the sequels, which we'll talk about, have changed the dynamic even more in terms of doing something different with Star Wars and reigniting people's passions in different ways. Like, no, the prequels are good in comparison to this new thing, and you know, that whole shebang that can happen. But I just looking at these movies to themselves, I think they deserve credit.
Yeah.
For what they do, even though I can pick on the editing. And you even picked on the editing in terms of what takes they chose. You remember from the behind the scenes, they showed that they used different takes
Yeah.
in the same shot. You know, like you'd have one take of Hayden Christensen being matched with a different take of Natalie Portman, you know?
Right.
That sort of thing. And then you watch the movie and you're thinking, like, I don't know how you you thought you picked a good edit of this.
Right.
It's weird. It's really strange to think that they put that much thought into the editing and it's lacking so much in that department. But a good thing I can give credit to Ben Burt for his sound design because the sound design is stunning.
Yeah.
He's a genius at that part. So at least you can give him partial credit, I guess, for the brilliance of one part of this. An interesting start to the Star Wars saga. I'm excited for the next episode, my friend.
For sure.
With Revenge of the Sith and Solo, a Star Wars story, where we get to go between two different eras of Star Wars and two different kinds of Star Wars movies in terms of getting outside of the Skywalker saga and going to other parts of the world.
Yeah.
It still manages to bring a lightsaber in briefly, but for the most part is lightsaber free.
Right.
But they had to ignite a lightsaber. Anyway, yeah, we'll have to talk about that when we talk about Solo. In the meantime, my friend, it's been a pleasure going back to Galaxy Far, Far Away with you.
Indeed. And same here. And again, may the fourth be with you.
May the fourth be with you, sir. See you guys next time here on Movie Marathon Mood.